She has survived car crashes, kidnappings, sepsis, a psychotic breakdown, and more near-death experiences than almost anyone else who has ever walked down the cobbles. But this time, the question isn't whether Carla Connor can survive Weatherfield. The question is whether Alison King is done with the role that made her a household name. 4 weeks now, whispers have been building across the soap press and social media that Carla's story might finally be reaching its end, and just as fans brace themselves to say goodbye, a fresh wave of speculation has erupted asking the opposite question entirely. Could this so-called exit actually be a setup for a comeback? Is Coronation Street playing a longer game than anyone realized? And most importantly, what has the show itself had to say about it? Stick around, because we're breaking down everything that's been said, everything that's been hinted at, and everything fans think they know about Alison King's future as Carla Connor. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're a longtime Corrie fan, you already know exactly why this story matters so much. Carla Connor is not just another character who wanders into the Rover's return for a pint and disappears a few months later. She is, by any measure, one of the most significant figures in the modern history of Coronation Street, and Alison King's performance has anchored some of the show's biggest, boldest, and most talked-about storylines for nearly 2 decades. So when even a hint of an exit starts circulating, it is never treated as small news. It becomes the kind of story that dominates soap columns, fan forums, and yes, YouTube channels just like this one for days on end. Let's rewind for a moment, because to understand why this rumor has hit so hard, you need to understand exactly who Carla Connor is and what she has meant to this show. Alison King first arrived on Coronation Street back in December 2006, stepping into the role of Carla, the sharp, glamorous, and fiercely independent boss of the underworld factory. From her very first scenes, Carla was written as a woman who refused to play by anyone else's rules, and that combination of vulnerability and steel is exactly what turned her into one of the most beloved and most talked about characters the show has ever produced. Over the years, Carla's story has taken in just about every kind of drama soap can offer. She survived the collapse of the factory roof. She endured a violent marriage to the manipulative Tony Gordon. She battled alcoholism, grief, and a harrowing psychotic breakdown after being secretly drugged by the villainous Stephen Reed. She has been married multiple times to Paul Connor, Tony Gordon, Peter Barlow, and briefly Nick Tilsley, and in more recent years she found herself falling for Detective Sergeant Lisa Swain, a relationship that gave the character a whole new emotional dimension and introduced her to a passionate section of the fanbase eager to see her happiness finally last. It hasn't always been smooth sailing behind the scenes either. Alison King has left the show before, most notably back in 2016, when she made the decision to step away from Carla after a decade in the role, wanting to spend more time with her daughter and explore other acting opportunities. Fans were devastated, but just over a year later, in 2017, King made a triumphant return, brought back by then-producer Kate Oates, who promised a bold new direction for the character built around Carla's complicated relationship with her half-sister Michelle Connor. That comeback proved just how much appetite there still was for Carla on our screens, and it cemented her status as one of those rare soap characters who can leave and still be welcomed back with open arms rather than quietly forgotten. Fast forward to the present, and Carla has once again been placed at the center of some of the show's most dramatic recent storylines. Earlier this year, viewers watched Carla become entangled in the explosive Corriedale crossover event with Emmerdale, a headline-grabbing special that saw her caught up in a devastating car crash after being held against her will by the scheming Becky Swain. It was tense, cinematic, and exactly the kind of storyline that makes headlines beyond the usual soap press, and for a while, fans genuinely worried that this might be the moment Carla's luck finally ran out for good. She pulled through, of course, because that's what Carla does, and in the weeks that followed, her relationship with Lisa Swain deepened into a full reconciliation that thrilled fans of the pairing affectionately nicknamed Swarla. Since then, Carla's story has continued to twist and turn, from a surprise baby left on her doorstep connected to her estranged brother Rob Donovan, to a violent attack at the factory that left her fighting for her life once again. It's against this backdrop of near-constant peril that a new and much more serious kind of speculation began to take hold. Reports started circulating suggesting that Carla's departure from the cobbles might finally be locked in, with some outlets describing her exit as effectively sealed after nearly 2 decades on the show. For a character who has cheated death so many times that fans have half-joked she's practically indestructible, the idea that this latest chapter could genuinely be her last hit many viewers hard. Social media lit up almost immediately, with longtime fans expressing disbelief that the show could really be prepared to let go of a character so fundamental to its recent history, while others pointed out that Carla has left in dramatic fashion before, only to return when the time was right. That's where things get particularly interesting, because rather than the story simply fading into a straightforward farewell narrative, chatter soon shifted towards the opposite possibility, that this could all be leading not to a permanent goodbye, but to another carefully engineered comeback further down the line. Fans who lived through the 2016 to 2017 cycle know the pattern well. Carla leaves under emotionally heavy circumstances. The door is left ever so slightly ajar, and months later she reappears to a fresh, reinvented storyline built specifically around her return. Given how much dramatic ground her character has already covered this year alone, from the Corrie crash to her reunion with Lisa to the ongoing fallout from Becky Swain's schemes, some fans believe the show is simply too invested in Carla's world to walk away from her entirely. This is where the Coronation Street have their say side of the story comes in. As speculation intensified, attention naturally turned to what the show itself, and those closely connected to it, might reveal about Carla's true fate. Soap producers have a long history of being cagey about major cast decisions, often neither confirming nor denying reports until a storyline is ready to air, and that pattern appears to be holding here too. Rather than a clean, definitive statement one way or the other, what fans have largely been left with is a mixture of careful non-denials, teasing hints dropped in interviews about exciting things ahead for the character, and the kind of deliberately vague language that soap insiders know all too well tends to precede a big reveal rather than rule one out. It's a strategy Coronation Street has used before, and for a show built on cliffhangers, keeping fans guessing right up until the moment of transmission is very much part of the appeal. Naturally, this uncertainty has only fueled the fire online. Fan forums and social media threads have been flooded with theories, ranging from the belief that Carla's current storyline is building towards a dramatic on-screen death, to the more hopeful suggestion that she'll simply step back from Weatherfield for a while before returning once again, much as she did nearly a decade ago. Entertainment outlets covering the soap world have leaned heavily into the uncertainty too, running headline after headline built around the central question of whether this is truly the end, feeding into exactly the kind of prolonged suspense that keeps a story alive in the news cycle for weeks rather than days. Longtime viewers have been particularly vocal about how much they'd miss Carla if this really is the end, with many pointing to her chemistry with Lisa Swain, her enduring bond with on-off husband Peter Barlow, and her complicated but deeply loyal relationships with the wider Connor and Donovan families as proof that there's still plenty of story left to tell. So what could all of this actually mean for the future of the show? If Carla's exit does go ahead as reported, it would mark the end of one of Coronation Street's most enduring modern eras, closing the book on a character who has been at the heart of the show's biggest storyline since the mid-2000s. It would also leave a significant gap in the current ensemble, particularly given how tightly Carla's story has become woven into the lives of Lisa Swain, Peter Barlow, Michelle Connor, and the wider Connor and Donovan clan. Any departure of this scale tends to ripple outward, reshaping storylines for the characters left behind and opening up space for new dynamics to develop in Carla's absence. On the other hand, if this does turn out to be a case of history repeating itself, and Alison King eventually walks back through that famous cobbled street, it would hardly be the first time Coronation Street has used the illusion of a permanent exit to set up one of its most talked-about comebacks. Either way, the show clearly understands the value of keeping this particular mystery alive for as long as possible. Looking ahead, fans are already speculating about exactly how Carla's current storyline might resolve. Some believe her ongoing recovery from her recent attack could be building towards a health-related exit, allowing the show to send her off on her own terms rather than in a blaze of Corrie-style chaos. Others think the emotional weight of her reunion with Lisa Swain suggests the opposite, that the show is investing too heavily in that relationship to walk away from it now, and that any exit would likely be temporary rather than permanent. There's also a theory doing the rounds that any departure could tie back into unfinished business with her brother Rob Donovan, whose unpredictable return to Weatherfield has already reshaped Carla's world once this year. Whatever direction the story ultimately takes, one thing is clear: nothing about Carla Connor's story has ever been simple, and this chapter looks set to follow that same tradition right to the very end, whenever that end actually turns out to be. So, to bring it all together, here's where things currently stand. Reports have suggested Carla Connor's exit from Coronation Street may finally be locked in after nearly 2 decades of Alison King in the role, sparking heartbreak among longtime fans who have followed Carla through marriages, breakdowns, near-death experiences, and this year's headline-grabbing Corrie crossover. Yet rather than settling the matter, that speculation has opened the door to an entirely new wave of questions about whether this is truly goodbye or simply the latest chapter in Alison King's well-established pattern of leaving and eventually returning to the role that made her a soap legend. With Coronation Street keeping its cards close to its chest and offering little in the way of a definitive statement, fans are left exactly where the show wants them, hooked, guessing, and counting down the days until the truth finally airs on screen. That's everything we know so far about Alison King's future as Carla Connor, but as always with Coronation Street, this story is far from finished, and you can be sure we'll be back the moment there's a genuine update to share. Until then, we want to hear from you. Do you think Carla's time on the cobbles is really coming to an end, or do you reckon we'll be seeing Alison King back in Weatherfield before too long? Let us know your predictions down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and if you want to stay ahead of every twist, turn, and shock exit coming out of Coronation Street, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on so you never miss an update. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.